This particular vacant lot was not just an eyesore, it was a source of a lot of the problems that we were experiencing in the community. There were no owner occupants on the block. The space here was occupied by people who were either renting or squatting in nearby houses, and it was used mainly as a chop shop. That is, that cars that were either legally or illegally acquired were brought in and dismantled. Vehicle parts were strewn all over. There were dozens of vehicles driving in and out and being dumped here, along with tires and batteries and other assorted debris from dismantling vehicles. And in addition to that, it was also a dog fighting ring and a cockfighting ring, and occasionally a people and police fighting ring, and frequent shots fired, 3 sirens a day, lot of noise, lot of spill out into the street. It certainly kept people away from the block. I heard from people recently who said, "Oh yeah, I don't walk down York Street anymore because of the problems that started years ago." What happened was that the city's worst slumlord had a couple of properties here that she just let deteriorate, as it frequently happens, and finally they were demolished and it just became public use. So we went after it countless times in order to try to get the city to enforce code violations. And the city somehow managed to lose the fact that it had sold the vacant lot at tax auction a number of times and no longer had any idea who owned the property. So they were sending the violation notices to people who hadn't owned it 3 auctions ago. So nothing was ever enforced. And when one of our members found the property on Craigslist being offered for sale for $350 by an attorney in Texas who had bought it at some tax auction 3 or 4 years before, we jumped on it. It was like concrete because it had been run over for so long and hadn't absorbed water since the pre-Diluvian age, and so it was sort of a giant slime pit, and you couldn't get a drill into the ground. We got a grant, and we had some guys bring out a giant machine that was almost the width of the lot, with rakes on it, like huge prongs, and they couldn't turn the soil for us either. So we started with ryegrass and winter rye and a lot of buckwheat, and we kind of got the roots into the ground enough to have a green cover, so it looked sort of okay, and it began to loosen up the soil. And then we dumped, with the help of Grassroots Gardens, tons and tons and tons of compost, and that began to alter the quality of the surface enough so that we began to have enough soil to put in some flower beds. And we started in the front, put a fence across the front so that the neighbors could no longer bring their vehicles in, and put 2 flower beds in, and that was the beginning. That was 5 years ago. The block has changed drastically. We now have 4 owner occupants on the street. The houses have been repeatedly painted. There are people with gardens front and back now. There are 3 other people on the street who are growing vegetables in their own yards, in their own backyards. So they come over here and they give us pointers, and we go over there and give them pointers. That's a weed, and things like that. So there's some cross fertilization going on here. Yes, over the course of this time, the what they would call the crime rate what we call the siren rate on this block has changed so dramatically that it's almost hard to believe that one community garden could do that. I know there's a change in my own diet over the summer because I really hate uh, buying vegetables out of season. I really hate it. It's like stand there in the store and look at it and go, ooh. So I would rather that people know that buying things that are imported or brought halfway across the continent is very likely worse for you than not eating them, and that there are a lot of reasons why that's true. So we try to make sure that everything that we grow here is available to everybody who wants some. There are a lot of people who really only come and take a handful of herbs and go. And for them, that's a big difference in what they put in their diet. But for a lot of us who are in here putting in even just a little bit of time, there's an abundance of vegetables. The period of time when the spinach is going is like you walk out of the garden with an armload and hand it out as you go. So I know that changes people's diets because they are eating really totally clean food, probably for the only time in their lives that they have an opportunity to do so. And they're very conscious of it. They know we don't use pesticides, we don't use fertilizer, we don't use any chemicals at all in the soil. We have soil that's totally free of heavy metals and of any kind of contaminants. So we've completely changed the climate of the ground that the vegetables are growing in. And except for the pollution that falls from above, of which there's plenty, but nowhere near as much as when we actually had industry here, unfortunately. Things have gotten to the point where we feel pretty good about what we're eating. I think our first gratitude has to go to our council member more than anybody else. It was he who got us the guy out of housing court who had to do some community service, and he had a fencing company. He built our fence for us. It was he who connected us with countless other people and groups in order to get the property out of housing court so that we could actually have a lawyer write papers on it in the first place. And he's made it possible every single year, and for a long time twice a year, for us to have an infusion of funds with which we're able to make repairs, to get the stones that are holding up the beds, a lot of other material. The project that River Keepers has undertaken over the years to provide community gardens with rain barrels have enabled us to put together this chain of 9 rain barrels that is providing a water source, a steady water source through soaker hoses into our flower beds. The resources of A to Z Home Restoration rebuilt who's in the neighborhood, rebuilt the gutter on our neighbor's house and the downspout twice. Twice over the course of the last 5 years, so that we have a water source for the rain barrels, a constant water source for the rain barrels, except during droughts like we had last year. So we've had more community partners than we can shake a stick at, and then there are the neighbors who all dig deep into their pockets whenever we need something. I think the big thing that we'd like to have happen here is that it becomes a consistent passive recreation space, that we have movie nights here on a regular basis, that we're able to have regular block club meetings here rather than occasional ones, so that they're only called on account of rain if they have to be. uh, during all the warm months, and that people feel free to come, and especially the many students from Dieuville who are so close and live in the neighborhood, feel free to come here and use it as a space to sit, to study, and filter tomato, things
Yeah.
like that.